A very good morning, everybody. Welcome to this class. Uh, yes, allow me to just quickly check if we are live and then we'll get started with the lesson for the day. Yes, we are live. All right, let me quickly develop an introduction to the Unacademy platform before we begin with the questions that I've curated for today's class. Unacademy is perhaps India's largest learning platform today when it comes to any kind of test preparation, any kind of competitive exam. Uh, this YouTube channel is specifically for management exams such as CAT, NMAT, GMAT, ZAT, MAT, SNAP, and the likes. I am Prankur Arora. I am going to be taking you on this journey of learning. I have I'm a trainer and a coach. I've been in the learning industry for a better part of the last couple of years. I've consulted with various organizations on different aspects of learning and development organizations such as Marico, ITC, Becton Dickinson, FMC Corp, and the likes. I'm also a published author. Wrote this book called "It's Not Funny." Garnered, favorable response from the likes of Vishwapati Sarkar and Papa CJ. Um, I also hold advanced certifications in facilitation from an American organization called Leadership Management International, and I co-founded the startup known as Thought Sutra. So yeah, that's pretty much about me. Welcome aboard this journey of learning. Uh, there are quite a lot of features that add to the Unacademy pedagogy. Features such as giving you access to daily live classes where all kinds of interaction happens in real time between the learners and the educators. Features such as you know regularly curating live tests and quizzes, and the idea of these tests and quizzes is to help you evaluate your performance, develop a lot of perspective about where you are versus where you want to be in your learning journey. All the courses on the platform are pretty much structured very much in line with the exam syllabus to help you get the best of anything and everything. And with one subscription to the platform, you get access to all kinds of live and recorded content that you can watch from the comfort of any of your devices. There are quite a lot of educators on the platform. All of these educators are, highly credible people um, who over the years they've mentored thousands of aspirants into various top tier management institutions, be it your IMs, MDIs, XLRIs, ISBs, you name it, they've cracked it basically, right? And you can experience live classes from all these people for free, and you can start learning from them before deciding whether you want to enroll in for the benefits that come along with subscription or not. New batches, new courses, they keep on going live. Language is never a barrier either, because we've got educators who teach in vernacular languages as well, right? So if you're not as comfortable in English, I'm pretty sure we can find somebody who's teaching in a regional language that you were brought up on, right? A really cool thing about the platform is that you design your own schedule. You decide what are the kind of courses you want to enroll into, who are the educators you want to be learning from. All that ownership is on you, right? And as I mentioned, everything happens in real time on the platform. Even the question and answers, they are conducted in the form of live polls, right? So you can participate in all these live polls and start competing for a place on the leaderboard. Also, you will see that I'll be scribbling a lot of stuff on the class notes. So all these class notes, they're made available to you once you subscribe to the platform. Talking of subscription, these are the various subscription models. You can clearly see as the time period of subscription goes up, the cost of the subscription per month is going down dramatically. Right. So if you're preparing for next year, I would highly recommend at least a 6 month or a 12-month journey. Having said that, if you use my name Prankur, you'll get an extra 10% off on any of the subscriptions that you're going for, right? With that in mind, let's begin with the first question of the day. This is a sentence elimination question, so you've got to pick the odd one out, right? Got to pick the odd one out. Okay, so let's see what it is that we've got to be doing in order to be able to solve this question properly. Yep. You will know that it has because you will start experiencing aha moments with respect to the problem. Once you admit that your unconscious mind is the source of whatever brilliance you possess, you can take steps to extract the maximum possible benefit from your association with it. What you must do instead, again, instead is a contrast word, right? So we've got to be cognizant of these keywords that we can kind of develop links with. What you must instead do is interest your unconscious mind in working on a problem. By working on it with your conscious mind, what you will quickly discover is that it can't be ordered about. What can't be ordered about? The mind can't be ordered about, right? The mind can't be ordered about. Once you admit that your unconscious mind is the source of whatever brilliance you possess, you can take steps to extract the maximum possible benefit from your association with it. What you will quickly discover is that it can't be ordered about. It refers to the mind, obviously. What you must instead do. So now we are developing a contrast. What you must instead do is interest your unconscious mind in working on a problem by working on it with your conscious mind. So I can clearly see BDC as a very cogent paragraph here, and A seems to be the sentence that is the odd one out because it is not really talking about this. It is talking about the mind, but in very different connotations. You will know that it has. You will know that what has. You will know that it has because you will start experiencing aha moments with respect to the problem. What problem are we referencing here? Right? So, with these concerns, option A, I think, is the odd one out in this case. Right? Let's move on to the next question now. What we call fundamentalism has always existed in a symbiotic relationship with a secularization that is experienced as cruel, violent, and invasive. Historically, wherever secular governments were established to separate religion and politics, a counter-cultural movement developed in response determined to bring religion back into public life. In the developing world, secularization usually came with colonial rule. It was hence seen as a foreign import and rejected as profoundly unnatural. All too often, an aggressive secularism has pushed religion into a violent riposte. Right. So, if you look at sentences A and B, they're both talking about secularization and the violent response that we get in, to as for example, when you look at this, what we call fundamentalism has often existed in a symbiotic relationship with a secularization that is experienced as cruel, violent, and invasive. So, loggerheads, secularization, and religious fundamentalism being at loggerheads. Option 2 or sentence B. Historically, wherever secular governments were established to separate religion and politics, a counter-cultural movement developed in response, determined to bring religion back into public life. Again, secularization and the response to it in opposition. Sentence D. All too often, an aggressive secularism has pushed religion into a violent riposte. So, again, the idea being that you are talking about the response, the cruel backlash that secularism gets. It's only in sentence C that we're talking about secularization, under the thread of colonialism. That secularization came into being because of colonialism, right? It was hence seen as a foreign import and rejected as profoundly unnatural. So, option C in that context becomes the odd one out because it is talking about secularization, yes, but it's talking about secularization under the thread of the colonial rule, which is not really uh, being developed on in any other sentence, right? So, C in that context is the odd one out. Let's look at another question. Right, so let's look at it now. In fact, compared to other mammals, humans are actually naturally adapted for a relatively low protein intake, requiring protein to make up just 10% of our daily calorie requirement. Over the past 50 years, research has consistently found that whenever we tinker with our natural protein needs, it can have adverse consequences at all phases of our lives. This became associated with an increased risk of developing chronic diseases such as cancer in later life, forcing the formula to be adapted to have a lower protein content. Human breast milk is quite low in protein when cow's milk formula was first used to create an artificial replacement for breast milk. The excessive protein content was found to cause accelerated growth rates in early life. Right. So, yeah. When you look at all statements, you will be able to figure out that, for example, here, what became associated with an increased risk of developing chronic disease, right? Over the past 50 years, research has consistently found that whenever we tinker with our natural protein needs, it can have adverse consequences at all phases of our lives. Forcing the formula. What formula here, right? What became associated? And when we look at the last sentence, we'll get answers to all of this. Human breast milk is quite low in protein. When cow's milk formula, when cow's milk formula was first used to create an artificial replacement for breast milk, the excessive protein content was found to cause accelerated growth rates in early life, right? This became associated. So this became what became associated? This idea of everything that happened in sentence D. What formula are we talking about? The cow milk formula here, right? So BDC are kind of a link in that context, right? BDC are kind of a clear link in that context that over the past 50 years, research has found that whenever we tinker with our natural protein needs, it can have adverse consequences at all phases of our life, right? And you're developing on that in D, and in C, you're validating everything you're mentioning in sentence D. A, in that context, becomes the odd one out because even though it is talking about protein intake, right? It is kind of doing a comparison with other mammals, which no other sentence is doing, right? No other sentence is comparing the protein requirements and the calorie requirements and the protein content of what humans consume as compared to what mammals need. So A clearly is the odd one out in that scenario. Let's look at another question. Right, let's look at the sentences now. Letters let us write words while emoji let us write gestures. Emoji are so widely used that they are rightly called the lingua franca of the world. Now, this is a hint. So widely used that they are called this. This means that we are talking about how prevalent they are. And lingua franca typically means, language that is widespread, right? They are the equivalent of gesticulating to add emphasis. While they convey a writer's intentions, emoji are not a language in themselves. So we can see that they are typically speaking to, uh, two threads here. The one thread is that they are very widely used, and the second thread is they're not a language. Right? One thread is they're so widely used that they are a language in themselves, and the second thread is emojis are not a language in themselves. Right? So we have to figure out what the main idea of this paragraph can be so that the other thread is the odd one out. Or let's go over the sentences again with this thought process now. Letters let us write words while emoji let us write gestures. We are talking about letters here, and therefore, when we talk about writers, there's a proper callback. There's a reference. We are talking about letters, so we are talking about writers as well. They are the equivalent of gesticulating to add emphasis. What are the equivalent of gesticulating to add emphasis? Emoji, right? Emoji. While they convey writer's intentions, what convey writer's intentions? Emoji convey writer's intentions, right? So A, C, and D are kind of related in that context, right? Uh, we have letters, we have writers, and we have the meaning and the purpose of emoji as well. B clearly becomes the odd one out because D is saying they are not a language in themselves, and B is saying that they are so widely used that they are called the lingua franca of the world, that they are the language of the world, right? So B in that context becomes the odd one out because A, C, and D are talking about emojis and their uses and what it really means and what is the purpose. B is not really doing that, so we eliminate option B in this scenario. Let's look at another question. Since birds are the modern descendants of dinosaurs, they're likely to have once had teeth instead of beaks. Okay. Birds are the descendants of dinosaurs. They are likely to have once had teeth instead of beaks. However, 100 million years ago, a diverse range of non avian dinosaurs spouted all manner of plumage and, like modern birds, doubtless made a great deal of use of them even if they could not fly. Alright. This fact became known way back in 1861 when paleontologists discovered a bird fossil about 150 million years old, now classified as Archaeopteryx, which had teeth. Researchers have now published details of how avian edentulism occurred in one common bird ancestor more than 100 million years ago. So let's when you look at all this, you can clearly see that there are three sentences that are referring to how dinosaurs, they the birds once had they're likely to have once had teeth instead of beaks. So we are talking about birds descending from dinosaurs and teeth here. In C as well, we are talking about how when they discovered a bird fossil, they had teeth, and now they established researchers have now published details about of how avian edudentalism occurred in one common bird ancestor more than 100 million years ago. So there are three sentences which are referencing the presence of teeth in fossils and how birds have descended from dinosaurs. It's only sentence B which is not talking about teeth, which is not talking about anything pertaining to edentalism, right? Which is not talking about fossils and teeth. However, 100 million years ago, a diverse range of non avian dinosaurs spouted all manner of plumage. Instead, it is talking about feathers, it is talking about the outer covering of dinosaurs, right? And it is referencing flying instead of eating through teeth, right? Or having beaks or anything. So, B clearly in that context is the odd one out in this scenario. Let's move on to another sentence elimination question. Party politics is all too often merely the surf, spray, and scum of the ocean that is society. It's the prevailing undercurrents, the slow shifting of tectonic plates that count in the long run. Emmanuel Macron's victory in France's legislative elections is the consummation of a political revolution which started with his triumph in the recent presidential election. While on the surface, the dominance of Macron's party, founded less than 2 years ago, is a huge transformation of the political landscape in France, the low turnout suggests that this is skin deep. In France, growing abstention is the powerful current that risks eventually pulling the country under. Right, so we can clearly see that, when you look at the sentences, there is a very powerful imagery that is being made here. Party politics is all too often merely the surf, spray, and scum of the ocean, prevailing undercurrents, right? In France, growing abstention is the powerful current that risks eventually pulling the country in. So the imagery is very much matching in sentences A and D. When you look at sentence C as well, while on the surface the dominance is a huge transformation of the political landscape, the low turnout suggests that this is skin deep. So again, the imagery is, to a certain extent being complemented in sentence C as well. Whereas when you look at sentence B, Emmanuel Macron's victory in France's legislative elections is the consummation of a political revolution which started with his triumph in the recent presidential election. Right. So B in that context is very, 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 very it, even though it is talking about France, even though it is talking about Emmanuel Macron, it is not really referencing anything to that imagery, right? So clearly we can see that B, sentence B, is the odd one out in that scenario. All right. Another sentence elimination question. Okay, let's look at the sentences now. Museums are not neutral spaces where objects exist without context. They do more than allow us to engage with history and art. Museums are not neutral spaces where objects exist without context. They do more than allow us to engage with history and art. They are forms in and of themselves. They referencing museums. They are forms in and of themselves which, to varying degrees, enable and propagate missions and legacies through design and architecture. All right. Try as some museums might to go unnoticed as simply the pedestal or wall on which history and artwork hangs, there is no escaping the weight of the objects and stories told within their architecture. Okay. A museum of modern art in Cologne isn't so different from a museum of modern art in Chicago. You see the same major canon artists arranged in more or less the same way. So, what is it that we're talking about here? When you look at sentences A, B, and C, they're trying to establish museums as not just buildings where art is stored, but museums as institutions that speak volumes about art and history through their own design and architecture as well, right? Propagate missions and legacies through design and architecture. Museums are not neutral spaces. They do more than allow us to engage with history and art. Try some museums might to go unnoticed as simply the pedestal or wall on which history and art hangs. There is no escaping the weight of the objects and stories told within their architecture. So, we are talking about how even the art and the institution, the building of museums in itself speaks volumes because of the historical context of its design and its architecture. So, A, B, and C in that context are saying that museums are also art. Whereas sentence D, so A, B, and C are talking about how museums are also art, how they are so unique. Whereas when you look at sentence D, it talks about how two different museums are the same, right? So, D in that context becomes the odd one out because it is totally contradicting the views and the sentiments expressed in sentences A, B, and C. Right? Hope you've understood this. Let's move on to a parajumbles question now. Right. Hate speech is characterized by a deliberate targeting of communities rather than beliefs. What the management must seek to do is to not let political discussions and debates to descend into vituperative attacks and hate speech. But such an association will be spurious as questioning orthodoxy and conservatism is not tantamount to hate speech. But such an association, that means it is talking about, or this is a callback to a particular association that this paragraph is making in some other sentence. The students' body activism has been criticized by detractors and it has been sought to be associated, exactly, it's sought to be associated with hate speech. So the association in sentence C is referring to the association that is mentioned in sentence D. So C will follow D, right? C will follow D. And the only option that is giving us that is or rather options 3 and 4. But there's gap in option 3 where B is getting sandwiched between D and C. So let's look at what will make the maximum amount of sense. But such an association will be spurious as questioning orthodoxy and conservatism is not tantamount to hate speech. So C is telling us what is not hate speech, and A is defining hate speech, that hate speech is characterized by a deliberate targeting of communities rather than beliefs. So DCA clearly makes a lot of sense. And sentence B, what the management must seek to do is to not let political. So DB sentence B is talking about resolution, how you can resolve this problem, right? So DCAB in that context makes the maximum amount of sense, right? Let's look at another parajumbles question now. Comments have the potential to turn a news website into a democratic polyphony, but there is also a danger of it descending to cacophony if readers do not express opinions in a language that behooves the requirements of a matured public sphere. See, it can become a site for multiple concurrent debates, for registering dissent, for pursuing an idea, and finally for building a polity of informed choices. The role of the moderators is to retain the space for polyphony and reject voices that breed cacophony. Right. So we can clearly see that but means that it is a contrasting word. It is a contrasting sentiment that is being expressed in the sentence. But there's also a danger of it descending to cacophony if readers do not express opinions. Of it descending to cacophony, it refers to what? It refers to news website, right? Comments have the potential to turn a news website into a democratic polyphony, but there's also a danger of it descending into cacophony if readers do not express opinions in a language that behooves the requirements of a matured public sphere. It can become a site for multiple concurrent debates, for registering dissent, for pursuing an idea, and finally for building a polity of informed choices. So, C is kind of explaining the idea of democratic polyphony that sentence A is talking about. So A, C is a link. B says what will happen in contrast. So it will definitely follow B here, probably, right? And then we have D. The role of the moderators is to retain the space for polyphony and reject voices that breed cacophony, right? So AC BD makes the maximum amount of sense in that regard. Let's look at another parajumbles question. Okay, let's look at the sentences here now. A more vital, dynamic, and inclusive form of democracy is generated as the risk of corruption reduces, election fever abates, and attention to the common good increases. As those who have been drafted are exposed to expert opinion, objective information, and public debate, voting is not simply based on gut feel but careful deliberation. All right. Um, Renaissance states such as Venice and Florence experienced centuries of political stability by practicing democracy on the basis of sortition or drafting by lot. With sortition, so there's a link here. With sortition, everyone does not vote on an issue few understand, but a random sample of the population is drafted to come to grips with the problem in order to take a sensible decision. Right. So in sentence C, they are defining sortition as a process that follows drafting by lot. In D, they are developing on it clearly. So CD is a link. With sortition, everyone does not vote. And then there's this that is mentioned, but a random sample of the population is drafted to come to grips with the problem in order to take a sensible decision. So drafting is referenced here. And then we have sentence B, which says, as those who have been drafted are exposed to expert opinion. So DB is also link. CD is a link and DB is a link. Which option is giving us that? This is not giving us the link between DB. Um, DB here, and then we have CDBA, we have DCBA. No. So CDBA, A as the conclusion, a more vital, systemic, dynamic, and inclusive form of democracy is generated as the risk of corruption reduces, election fever abates, and attention to common good increases. So clearly, CDBA is the perfect answer option in this scenario. Let's move on to a sentence correction question now. Cajuns speak a dialect brought to southern Louisiana by the 4,000 Acadians who migrated there in 1755. Their language is basically 17th century French, to which has been added English, Spanish, and Italian words. Their language is basically 17th century French, to which has been added. This verb is basically talking about what have been added: English, Spanish, and Italian words. This is plural, right? This is plural. The verb has to be plural as well, where the verb is singular, so we eliminate option A. And then we eliminate option B, added to which is. This is again a singular verb, right? To which English, Spanish, and Italian words have been added. Kind of makes sense. Sentence C makes a lot of sense. D. With English, Spanish, and Italian words having been added to it. When we have with, why are we unnecessarily using another pronoun? Eliminate option D as well. E. And in addition. And in addition are together redundant. There's this case of redundancy. So we eliminate option E as well. C makes the maximum amount of sense. To which English, Spanish, and Italian words have been added. Have is a plural verb, clearly, right? Wait, let me kind of. Yeah. So this is paragraph 1. This is we are starting with the comprehension now. Right, let's read this comprehension now, the paragraph. Let's see if we've understood it. As defined by the geographer Ifu Tuan, topophilia is the affective bond between people and place. So, topophilia is clearly the subject. His 1974 book set forth a wide ranging exploration of how the emotive ties with the material environment vary greatly from person to person and in intensity, subtlety, and mode of expression. Okay. Factors influencing one's depth of response to the environment include cultural background. Now we're talking about the factors that influence this. Gender, race, and historical circumstance, and Tuan also argued that there is a biological and sensory element. Okay. Topophilia might not be the strongest of human emotions. Indeed, many people feel utterly indifferent toward the environments that shape their lives. But when activated, it has the power to elevate a place to become the carrier of emotionally charged events or to be perceived as a symbol. So, emotion between place and humans, topophilia, is what paragraph 1 kind of talks about. Paragraph 2. Aesthetic appreciation is one way in which people respond to the environment. A brilliantly colored rainbow after gloomy afternoon showers, a busy street alive with human interaction. One might experience the beauty of such landscapes that had seemed quite ordinary only moments before or that are being newly discovered. This is quite the opposite of a second topophilic bond, namely that of the acquired taste for certain landscapes and places that one knows well. When a place is home, or when a space has become the locus of memories or the meanings of gaining a livelihood, it frequently evokes a deeper sense of attachment than those predicated purely on the visual. A third response to the environment also depends on the human senses but may be tactile and olfactory, namely a delight in the feel and smell of air, water, and the earth. So now we are talking about the how emotions seep into it, right? And then there was the example of the home as well, right? And there are essentially three topophilic bonds that they talked about. One is the purely aesthetic, right? Second is you know second is that of acquired taste, for example the home, and the third is the response to the environment, right, in terms of the senses that we have. Paragraph 3. Topophilia and its very close conceptual twin, sense of place, is an experience that, however elusive, has inspired recent architects and planners. Most notably, new urbanism seeks to counter the perceived placelessness of modern suburbs and the decline of central cities, however, through neo traditional design motives. Although motivated by good intentions, such attempts to create places rich in meaning are perhaps bound to disappoint. As Tuan noted, purely aesthetic responses often are suddenly revealed, but their intensity rarely is long lasting. Topophilia is difficult to design for and impossible to quantify, and its most articulate interpreters have been self reflective philosophers such as Henry David Thoreau, evoking a marvelously intricate sense of place at Walden Pond, and Tuan describing his deep affinity for the desert. So purely aesthetically, when you're designing topophilia, is something that is very hard to achieve because of its subjective nature, is what they are expressing here. And then finally, we have paragraph 4. Alright, let's read this now. Topophilia connotes a positive relationship, but it often is useful to explore the darker affiliations between people and place. Patriotism, literally meaning the love of one's terra patria or homeland, has long been cultivated by governing elites for a range of nationalist projects, including war preparation and ethnic cleansing. Residents of upscale residential developments have disclosed how important it is to maintain their community's distinct identity, often by casting themselves in a superior social position and by reinforcing class and racial differences. And just as a beloved landscape is suddenly revealed, so too many landscapes of fear cast a dark shadow over a place that makes one feel a sense of dread or anxiety or topophobia. This is the first question now. In the last paragraph, the author uses the example of residents of upscale residential developments to illustrate the option A, manner in which environments are designed to minimize the social exclusion of their clientele. Now, this option kind of, implies that the clients are made to feel at home, right? Manner in which environments are designed to minimize the social exclusion of their client. Clients are made to feel at home is what this is implying, and uh, clearly the option is incorrect because residents of upscale residential developments, it was kind of used to capture how they enforce superior position because of the place that they live in, right? How they are kind of dividing on the basis of class and race. That is what this was used to describe. Eliminate option A. Option B, introduction of nationalist projects by such elites to produce a sense of dread or topophobia. The option implies that it is uh, It is kind of unrelated because the idea of topophobia was something that was a different idea altogether, right? So therefore we'll kind of eliminate option B. Option C, social exclusivism. Social exclusivism practiced by such residents in order to enforce a sense of racial or class superiority. This kind of seems the most appropriate. D says sensitive response to race and class problems in upscale. The opposite, rather. There was no sensitive response, right? It indicates compassion, it indicates considerate response, but rather dividing. They were dividing people on the basis of race and class, and that is very well expressed in option C. Which one of the following comes closest in meaning to the author's understanding of topophilia? Right, let's look at all the options and see whether they make sense or not. Option A, scientists have found that most creatures, including humans, are either born with or cultivate a strong sense of topography. Uh, Look, the entire the entire passage kind of deals with topophilia, and topography is unrelated to topophilia. So we eliminate option A. Option B, the tendency of many cultures to represent their land as motherland or fatherland may be seen as an expression of their topophilia. Uh, this is kind of topophobia, right? And reference to topophobia does not represent the author's view on topophilia. So we'll eliminate option B as well. Option C, nomadic societies are known to have the least affinity for the lands through which they traverse because they tend to be topophobic. Uh, Again, this kind of speaks about, you know, love of language more than, or rather, again, this is topophobia. This is topophobia, where they have the least affinity for the lands through which they traverse, right? So, wait, I think I have kind of gotten confused to a certain extent here. This is topophobia that the author was expressing. This rather is something different, and we'll come to it again. Let's look at D first. The French are not overly patriotic, but they will refuse to use English as far as possible, even when they know it well. So, this is love of language, which is different from love of place. So, we'll eliminate D as well. We'll eliminate C because people, nomads, seem to have topophobia, right? Then, the tendency of many cultures to kind of represent their land as motherland or fatherland may be seen as an expression of their topophilia. It kind of uh, comes closest in meaning to the author's understanding, because even though topophilia has a lot of positive connotation, has a lot of positive connotation, it is the author expressed how it is used to explore darker affiliations between people and place, right? Patriotism, the author literally said, which it is the love of, a person's terra patria, if I'm not wrong, right? So, despite a negative tone, the author says that, one form of topophilia is patriotism. Even though not wholesome, it does come closest to, the author's understanding of topophilia from among all the listed answer options. So, I'll go with B here. Let's look at the next question. Topophilia is difficult to design for and impossible to quantify. Let's look at all the answer options. The deep. First, let's go back to the passage, right? Yeah. Um, as Tuan noted, purely aesthetic responses often are suddenly revealed, but their intensity rarely is long lasting. Topophilia is difficult to design for and impossible to quantify. This line, difficult to design for and impossible to quantify, and its most articulate interpreters have been self-reflective philosophers such as Henry David Thoreau, evoking a marvelously intricate sense of place at Walden Pond, and Tuan describing his deep affinity for the desert, right? um, which of the following best captures that meaning? Option A says, uh, the deep anomie of modern urbanization led to new urbanism's intricate sense of place. Now, what does this option mean? Anomie means probably a lack of something, right? A lack of something, and um, it is kind of unrelated to the passage, right? The deep anomie of modern urbanization led to urbanism's intricate sense of place. Uh, Anomie does not really sit well with everything we read in the paragraph, right? Let's look at something better. If we don't find something better, we'll come back to it, right? That is how you ought to solve a paragraph when you're kind of trying to understand what it is saying. Architects have to objectively quantify spaces and hence cannot be topophilic. Um, An objective analysis by architects does not kind of explain the reason as to why it is difficult to quantify topophilia, right? So that is why I'll go to the next option. Philosophers, architects are uniquely suited to develop topophilic design. Now, um, this statement is in the form of an opinion and does not really explain what the above statement was saying, right? We have to kind of explain what the other statement is saying. This seems to be an opinion rather than an explanation. People's responses to their environment are usually subjective exactly, and so cannot be rendered in design. See, since every person has different topophilic attractions according to the author, right? And they have different responses to aesthetics. Capturing topophilia in the form of design, the author said, is impossible, and this option kind of elaborates and explains the reason for quantifying topophilia, right? So, therefore, option D is the most appropriate option, in my understanding. The word topophobia in the passage is used to, obviously, option A, represent a feeling of dread towards particular spaces and places. This is a very clear cut answer, right? Let's move on to the next question. Which of the following statements, if true, could be seen as not contradicting the arguments in the passage? Which of the following statements, if true, could be seen as not contradicting? So, this is an accept question. Option A says new urbanism succeeded in those designs where architects collaborated with their clients. See, the author says, again, the author said that the new urbanism that tries to induce sense of place is bound to fail. That is what the author was saying. And since there is no mention of clients irrespectively, new urbanism is kind of going to fail. Hence, it kind of is contradicting to what the author said, right? I'll go to option B. Generally speaking, in a given culture, the ties of the people to their environment vary little in significance or intensity. Uh, if we go back to the first paragraph itself, right? His 1974 book set forth a wide range. Look at the second line. His 1974 book set forth a wide range exploration of how the emotive ties with the material environment vary greatly from person to person and in intensity, subtlety, and mode of expression. Right? So, this option is kind of contradicting the passage yet again. Right? Uh, let's look at the third option. The most important, even fundamental response to an environment is our tactile and olfactory response. The author kind of listed out three ways, right? Olfactory, uh, but did not really emphasize on anything more. The most important. If you go back to the passage, mm, right, three ways, right? Uh, the third response depends on human senses, but maybe tactile and olfactory, namely a delight in the feel and smell of the air and water. So there were three things that the author kind of listed out, right? But did not really say what was the most important. So even this kind of contradicts to what the author said. D says patriotism, usually seen as a positive feeling, is presented by author as a darker form of topophilia. Obviously, this is the answer, right? The author presented patriotism in that fashion. So with this, we've come to the end of today's class. You guys, thank you so much for joining in. Thank you so much for tuning in. And yeah, I'll see you back again with more questions, with more preparation. And till then, stay strong, stay safe, and if you found this video useful, do comment, right, and do share it with your friends as well. This is Prankur Arora signing off yet again. See you guys.